Okay.
MashaAllah, Waqas, you're captaining the ship over there.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Rabbi Yassir wa'in wa barik ya Arhamar Rahimin. Welcome, first of all, to our contributors, the panel. Allah Most High bless you all. Welcome back to Dr. Shadee. Shaykh Ahmed, people on Islam Answers, I've seen quite a lot of recently. Allah Most High bless you, Shaykh Ahmed, for doing the Ramadan reminders and especially the Q&As. For a long time, I had this idea of trying to get all four madhabs in the Q&As, and inshallah, we're getting there. And welcome, Dr. John Starling, for the first time, inshallah ta'ala, onto the Islam Answers platform. Inshallah, the first of many. So, and welcome to the audience, inshallah. Now, on this particular Unity panel, we don't really look at the questions that are coming in, although it's a live stream. It's a live discussion, inshallah ta'ala. People can leave comments, but this is not a Q&A. We're going to discuss amongst ourselves. Today, we are going to be speaking about Aqida. We're going to speak about Ashari Aqida. Now, many people are aware, of course, the panelists are aware that Ashari is often used to include Asharis and Maturidis. Now, so it's not like we're excluding the Maturidis, but you know, there's not a huge difference between the Asharis and the Maturidis, so it's often used to encompass both. So we're going to be speaking about Ashari Aqida Creed and Hanbali Creed, which is often known as Athari Creed. Our representatives of the Hanbali Creed can clarify that for us, inshallah ta'ala. Is that the correct use? Are they synonymous? Are they not quite synonymous? Is there a further clarification that's required there, inshallah? So as always, there's the Unity panel. The purpose is that although there may be certain differences that we have, inshallah ta'ala, the purpose is to recognize that despite those differences, we can come together, we can have a discussion, we can recognize that this is all within the realm of Ahlus Sunnah, and those people who use these differences to try to exclude certain parts of the Ummah from Islam sometimes, and sometimes from Ahlus Sunnah, this is wrong, this is incorrect. So I'm going to start with Dr. John, because he's the newcomer, Allah Most High bless him. And the first thing I want to put to yourself, Sayyidi, is do Atharis consider Ash'aris, or do Hanbalis, those who follow the Hanbali creed, consider Ash'aris to be outside of Ahlus Sunnah? Start with some controversy. Bismillah.
Jazakallah khair. First, before I start with a comment or two, I appreciate the invitation. And I'm not a doctor, by the way. I may be the only one in the group that's not.
I apologize.
Yeah, not a doctor, just a dude. Okay, so yeah, I don't want to mislead anybody there. So as I said, I appreciate the invitation. I'm happy to be here, and inshallah we'll have more opportunities in the future to work together. So your opening question, yes, we're talking about Aqida. It's controversial in many circles, especially when we get into defining what Ahlus Sunnah is made up of. And yeah, I'm going to give you a short answer. First, the question was kind of like Hanbali, Athari, Aqida. Are they synonymous? And I would say, yeah, they're used synonymously within the Hanbali madhab. Sometimes you might even see the word Salafi as a part of that terminology. But having said that,
is that use, including Salafi as one of the synonyms, is that recent because of the Salafi movement, or is this historic?
Yeah, so that's where I was getting at, because I wanted to put a little footnote on that so that we're not confused with classical usage of the terms versus what's become popularized today. So yeah, the word Salafi is something that's been used for quite some time, and I'm referring to it in that more classical, traditional sense. I'm very familiar with the popularized usage of the term. I came from that background, so I have an intimate awareness of what it actually means. And typically when people ask me personally, are you Salafi? I understand what they mean, and I say no. Unless they have some further clarification, I generally understand that as to be what it's become popularized today, in which the Hanbali school has some serious contentions with some of the doctrinal points that have been adopted by that particular movement. So yeah, that's what I'm referring to in terms of a classical usage of the term here. And so when I define what consists of Ahlus Sunnah, I refer to the Hanabila. So the short answer is the Hanbalis, they consider Ahlus Sunnah to be of three theological groups, as you opened up with already, which are the Atharis or the Hanabila, and the Asha'ira, the Ash'aris, and the Maturidis. So these are three groups. You can find this mentioned in the works of the Hanbali scholars. Just to mention one, Safarini, who's a well-known scholar in the tradition, he mentioned this specific thing. Ahlus Sunnah are three groups: the Atharis, their Imams Ahmed ibn Hanbal; Ash'aris, the Imam is Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari; and the Maturidis, their Imam being Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. So that is, I think, pretty much agreed upon, especially as things progressed in the development of the doctrinal school of the Hanabila. I think that's where the conclusion rests now. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Sayyidi. Allah most high bless you. I will come back to Shaykh Ahmed in a moment, but I want the other side of this as well. So Dr. Shadee, I'm guessing you are a follower of the Ashari creed. You can clarify that for yourself, inshallah ta'ala. If that is the case, then is it reciprocal as far as you're concerned? The Hanbali creed is part of Ahlus Sunnah, are they not? What's the detail there?
Well, first of all, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala ashraf al-anbiya wal mursalin, Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam taslima. First of all, you notice that these kinds of discussions are far more popular in the West than in the East now. And I think that there's a lot of people so interested in the deen. I think Americans, the British, we have a bright future. This is actually a sign of it. These discussions are a sign of it, because they're interested in the deen. They have a bright future. They're interested in knowledge. And if you're investigating something and you have so many new people investigating something, proof of that is the comment section of any video you put on Islam or Aqida. That's actually a good sign. Even if they're at odds with one another, I guarantee you anyone who studies this honestly and sincerely will come to the conclusion that we've came to today, which is that for the last millennium, 1,000 years or so, Ahl Sunnah has been defined by these three madhahib of Aqida. And when people are studying, they're only seeing, as that famous example is, the trunk of the elephant or the tail of the elephant or the tusk of the elephant, and they insist this is the only elephant. That's all right. There, give it 20 years, give it 5 years or 10 years. The age of the internet and us coming together, it'll probably be faster. They're kind of come to the same conclusion that all of us have come to. Probably all of us at some point 15 years ago didn't have the conclusion we have today. And the reason that I'm so confident in this is just go look at the books, look at the Turath al-Islami. The more you delve into it, you are going to open your mind to the fact, not too open either, right? But you're going to open your mind to the fact that the madhahib of fiqh are 4, and the madhahib of aqidah are 3. And then the Hanabila actually have it nice and gift wrapped as 1 in aqidah, fiqh, and if you take Abdul Qadir al-Jailani, I mean, you have a branding gift here that's all in 1, right? So if anything, I believe Western Muslims have a great future ahead of them because they're so interested. And that's what happens when you give people freedom. Islamic world, they don't have freedom. We have freedom. A lot of us are interested in the deen. And so we have the same conclusion. But I will say one thing about the Maturidis, why it's so important about the Maturidis. They didn't emerge out of the milieu that the Ashari emerged out of. They didn't emerge with any reaction to Greek philosophy or anything like that. A lot of the things being said about, they didn't even emerge knowing about the Ashari. or in a debate with those who had just translated the Greek texts. So a lot of the things that are said about the Ash'ari that they were influenced by Greek texts, well, the beauty of that is that, fine, highlight and delete the Ash'ari. You get the same results with the Maturidis across the Oxus River. That's why they call it Transoxania, Wara al-Nahr. I always say nobody knows what was going on Wara al-Nahr, right? It's so far away. But they didn't even know Ash'ari existed. They came up with the same conclusion. On the most important issues, which we're probably going to get to, Hanabila came up with the same conclusion. And that's why there's good to have three madhahib emerging, because you're going to see, and a lot of the most important issues, they came up with the same conclusion.
Shukran Sayyidi, Allah Most High bless you. So I'll go to Dr. Ahmed Metwally now, inshallah ta'ala. So now, Sayyidi, you may end up reiterating what Sheikh John said, but I'll ask you the same question. Do the Hanabila, those who follow Hanbali creed, do they have, let's expand it a little bit. Firstly, do they consider us Ahl Sunnah, or the Asharis Ahl Sunnah, the Maturidi as Ahl Sunnah? But despite that, are there any serious contentions they have?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. So I'm gonna just kind of build on what Sheikh John had mentioned about regarding, like, the synonymity between, the Hanbali, Athari, and Salafi. Just to point out that actually those terminologies are used as titles in the Aqida books authored by Hanabila, right? So, for example, Imam al-Baqi, his book, it's called Al-Ayn wal-Athar fi Aqaid Ahl al-Athar, right? And then he lists the Hanbali Aqida that is usually transmitted from the statements of Ahmed ibn Hanbal and the understandings and deductions and so forth. And then you have another book by Ibn Qa'id al-Najdi, rahimahullah, and he called it Najat al-Khalaf fi I'tiqad al-Salaf, right? And so you see these terminologies, they're constantly used, even in the titles of their books, to indicate that this is essentially something that is understood from the time of Ahmed ibn Hanbal. However, somebody might ask sometimes, why, if it's if it's the Aqida of the previous Imams and the previous people with them and Ahl Hadith and so forth, why is it later on known as Aqida Ahmed ibn Hanbal or Aqidat al-Hanabila, right? Because I get that question a lot. They're like, are the Hanbalis Atharis? Are the Hanbalis Ahl Hadith? Are the Hanbalis the Aqida of Ahl Salaf? And I say yes. And the question comes always, and it's not just for the individuals, but I think it's a question that comes across the board for quite a few years of why is it been specified that it's a Hanbali Aqida, right? Why is that? And the answer, honestly, is that when Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal became the one to be known as Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah later on after the fitna, right? And he was completely, subhanAllah, they came out of the fitna as a shining symbol of the authentic creed of Ahl Hadith and Ahl Salaf. And from there on, everybody that followed in his path, right? So it was called Aqidat Ahmed Hanbal, or they referred to, I'm upon the Aqidah of Ahmed Hanbal. And so later on, I guess, it kind of transmitted or kind of transitioned to be also known as Aqidat al-Hanabila. And I think there's even a famous statement by Imam Abu al-Hasan Ash'ari himself from his book Al-Ibana, where he even says that I am upon the Aqidah of Ahmed ibn Hanbal, right? And that speaks volumes of what is being, what Ahmed ibn Hanbal came to symbolize at the end, and him being called Imam Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, right? Now in terms of whether the Hanabila consider Ash'ari and Maturidiyya from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, then obviously the answer is yes, as Sheikh John had mentioned, and that's explicitly mentioned in a lot of their books, especially the latter books and explanations. But the question is, of course, did they have contentions, right? The answer is yes, of course they had contentions, right? All three groups had contentions between one another, right? Whether Ash'ari and Maturidiyya and the Hanabila and the Ash'ari. But the question is, were these contentions across the board throughout history, or were they in certain periods of times, right? If you look at it honestly, those contentions, even when they spoke about it, a lot of the times they are in specific aspects of Aqida itself, right? Mainly it has to do a lot of times with the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Or specific attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is it permissible to do ta'wil or not to do ta'wil? Like, when we talk about, like, stuff like that, yes, there was a bit of a contention that happens, but in the end, like, many of the scholars, even when they look at it and they step back from the heat of the argument, and once again, it's a lot of it intellectual, right? Sometimes it is personal, because some of the scholars from each side might have been harmed by some of the followers of, like, those thoughts, and it kind of did affect them, as they are human beings. And so, like, usually one of the things that kind of mentions, I think it was Ibn Asakir, if I'm not mistaken, he was talking about the situation at that time, and he would say things such as, like, especially in the beginning levels of history, and they said that the Hanabila in Baghdad, they continued to have the support, or search for the support of the Ash'ari, right, over Ashab al-Bid'ah, right, over the people of innovation. And so what that tells you, they never consider them people of innovation, right? They actually use their support to against the people of innovation. And so when you had an argument, and so they would say that when you depend on the kalam, then even the Hanabila, when they would speak about certain aspects, then they would be speaking with the tongue of the Ash'ari. And when the Ash'ari will be talking about more of the, like, al-athar and the way of deducing it, they'll be talking with the tongue of the Hanabila. And so there was that, like, constantly there, until one of the historical incidents that happened that kind of caused a bit of a rift, like, a division a little bit. But nonetheless, like, I'll tell you something, like, one of the latter scholars, Shaykh Abdullah ibn Sufyan al-Qaddumi, rahimahullah, when he was addressing the whole aspect of, like, if the hadith points to, like, firqa najiyah, like these, like, the group that is this kind of, like, I'm talking about the 72 or 73 branches, the one group that is going to be, like, safe and sound, and in the akhirah, the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And the question is, how is it through groups? So he responds to that. He said that there is no, like, there is no conflict over here, because Ahl al-Hadith, which is referring to as al-Hanabil al-Athariya, al-Ash'ariyya, and al-Maturidiyya, they are one group. They're the same group. The big why? Because they agree on the principal aspects of Tawheed, right, and Qadr, and, like, of, like, the bad, like, the shar and the khayr, and the conditions of prophethood, or the belief in prophethood, and mu'alat of the Sahaba, and all these things. And then he specifically said, and the differences between them are in small aspects, such as ta'wil of some of the ayat of the sifat. Is it permissible or not permissible? And so some people said it's permissible, like, Hanabila and Athari said it's not permissible. But overall, he said these are few things that do not necessitate taking one group out of the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, or call them mubtada'a, or calling them astray, right? And so this is kind of, I guess, answering a bit more, going, was there contention? Yes, there was contention, but in the end, like, like a latter scholar like Abdullah ibn Sufyan al-Qaddumi, rahimahullah, he clearly states, right, and the books of like, the later books of the Hanabila, they also clearly state that they are from Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Wallahu a'lam.
Barakallah feek, Sayyidi, Allah Most High bless you. So I want to focus the rest of our discussion mainly on that, then, ta'wil and tafwid now. And from the Ashari Maturidi perspective, we have within our tradition ta'wil and tafwid, and it's very, very clear. Ultimately, we feel, and I'm sure the Hanbalis agree with this, that the goal is tanzih. The goal is to, in our faith, purify any similarity within our Aqida, remove any similarity between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his creation, and to have that pure creed. Whether you get to that point through ta'wil or tafweed, it doesn't matter. Now, just for the audience, if I just quickly mention ta'wil and tafweed, ta'wil is when you look at a verse of the Holy Quran or a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in which it seems to be describing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or if you like, mentioning an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like Yadullahi fawqa aydihim. The yad of Allah is above their hands. Okay, you take a verse like that, and then what do you do with the word yad, which, if you were to translate it, would translate as hand? Okay, what do you say regarding that? So one approach is tafweed, and the details of precisely what tafweed is may differ, and we can get into that inshallah ta'ala. But essentially, tafweed is where certainly you don't provide an interpretation. You don't say, oh, it could mean power, or it could mean this, or it could mean that. You just essentially leave it as it is. Say, Allah Most High says he has a yad, leave it. Or the ayah says Allah Most High has a yad, leave it. Or the ayah mentions yadullah, leave it. Don't go into it. Okay. So loosely speaking, we would say that that is tafweed. As for ta'wil, ta'wil would be to say, and this for me as an Ashari, this is really, really important. The next point I'm going to mention, the caveat, to suggest a potential meaning. And I'm going to highlight that, to suggest. We're not saying that the ta'wil we are providing is definitely the case. It's a possibility. So we say, based on the Arabic language and based on, in certain cases, aqwal al-salaf, which we'll get into later, inshallah ta'ala, we provide an interpretation. So we may say, yadullahi is quwwatullah. Now, the yad of Allah Most High refers to the quwwah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So very loosely speaking, I just want to start there for the audience, and we can delve into nitty-gritty if we like. That's ta'wil and tafweed. And as I said, from the Ashari perspective, ultimately, now you'll always have certain scholars who take slightly harder lines, etc. You will get that at times. But ultimately, from our perspective, you could do this or you could do this. You could go down the route of tafweed or you could go down the route of ta'wil, as long as your focus is tanzih, as long as your focus is the transcendence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So having said that and introduced Sheikh John, I'm going to come to you again. Feel free to clarify any explanation I've given, inshallah ta'ala. And do you have the same, if you like, plurality as we have in the Ashari? We're quite open. Go down this path of tafweed, go down this path of ta'wil. We're fine either way, as long as tanzih, the transcendence, is being established.
Yeah, sure. I think I would agree with what you said. In the Hanbali madhab, I think this is the biggest, or one of the biggest issues of difference between the Hanabila and the Asha'ira, is the usage of ta'wil, which would be, as you kind of described, looking for a secondary meaning of a particular word. And I think it's also important to point out that the ta'wil is based on rules of the Arabic language. It's not some independent interpretation, like some poetic conclusion that I've arrived to on my own, but from what I understand, ta'wil is based on particular rules, and so that's why you have those that will engage in it. It's just to clarify for people that I know sometimes people, at least that ask me questions about it, aren't quite certain as to what's behind or the underpinnings of ta'wil. And in the Hanbali school, as I mentioned, ta'wil is permitted, but it's in kind of narrow constraints, if you will, within the madhab. So the first case would be that if it was something reported from the Prophet ﷺ, some type of ta'wil, or from some of his companions, or it's agreed upon by the Salaf that they made ta'wil of a particular verse or hadith regarding the attributes of Allah. So that might be one case that we could find within the madhab. And the other practice of ta'wil in the Hanbali doctrine is what's known, or what we would call as ta'wil ijmali, where you make a general ta'wil, and that means you're basically saying the term that's being used is not the initial meaning that comes to your mind. So the word that the verse that you quoted, yadullah fawqa aydihim, in which the first word that comes to mind, and I've asked many people this throughout my time of teaching, etc., right? Just Arabs, non-Arabs, everybody, what is the word yed? The first thing that comes to their mind is a hand. It's the primary word for that utterance, or that word there. It's the primary meaning for that word. And so the ta'wil ijmali means to say, no, it's not hand, or it's not jariha, which means a limb. And so that's certainly a ta'wil that the Hanabila they engage in. And as you mentioned, the underlying foundation there is tanzih, in order to exonerate Allah from deficiencies or human-like qualities. And so for us as Hanabila, when it comes to that, like you kind of hinted at, Yadullah fawqa aydihim, we would not make a ta'wil to say it meant qudra or power or authority or ni'mah, blessing. We would stop and we would say this is an attribute of Allah. And even translating the word when it came to reciting the verses or translating the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes can be problematic because translation is a form of explanation. And I think that would lead us into our next topic. And I don't want to jump the gun because everyone else is going to add to what I said. But yeah, I actually came across a passage which was related from Sufyan ibn Uyayna about translating these things, in which he said that you can't translate these the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not in Persian, and you can't talk about them in Arabic.
SubhanAllah.
Yeah, because that's what happens when you translate. Even just taking a one word translation, you have applied a meaning. Yeah. So.
Yeah, Imam Abu Hanifa had a similar position. He has exceptions, but he didn't allow translation. So you leave them as they are. I mean, these things are differed over, but one thing I want to, before I go to Dr. Shadee again, one thing I want to highlight here, I think one of the big problems in discussions, creedal discussions regarding Aqida is there's not unanimity of terminology. Not everybody is using the terminology in the same way. I remember a couple of years ago, I went to Speaker's Corner here. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with what that is.
It's world-renowned.
And I was speaking to a brother there, quite a hardcore Salafi brother there, and I was speaking about how Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas, as narrated in the Mustadrak of Imam Hakim, he made ta'wil of Yawma yukshafu an saq, the day that the saq is revealed. Okay, he made ta'wil. And then I said that same verse of the Holy Quran, we have a narration in the Musannaf where Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he made tafwid. Because me being an Ashari, that's how I use that term. You're either, ta'wil is when you're providing an interpretation, and tafwid is when you're not delving into that. And he got really offended and he said, you've lied against Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. So, I'm going to have husn al-dhann, and I'm going to think that, he has a different understanding of what tafwid means. So I think it's really important, and I try to do this as often as I can. When I'm having discussions with people, I try to get them to unpack the terminology. Like, you said this word, you're saying this, unpack it for me, tell me exactly what you mean. Because as you mentioned, ta'wil ijmali, often we're just going to call that tanzih. That's tanzih. That you're just saying that what comes to your mind immediately from a human perspective, or what might come to your mind and relate to creation, that's going to be done away with. So you could call that tanzih, you could call that ta'wil. So I think that's very, very important when people are having these discussions to unpack the terminology. And I want the other sheikhs to have their say on this before I move on to other related questions. But this is one of the reasons, personally, I am actually quite reluctant to use the terminology ilm al-kalam. I'm quite reluctant. Why? Again, it might be different in the US, but in the UK, that word has been so poisoned. They've spoken about it, and there's in the minds of many people, especially those who actually study, ilm al-kalam is something foreign to Islam. Ilm al-kalam has nothing to do with Islam. And ilm al-kalam is something, and obviously we do have statements from early scholars, ilm al-kalam is something that the Salaf or the early scholars, they were completely against. So as soon as I say to somebody, yes, I'm okay with ilm al-kalam, immediately they're going to get all kinds of notions in their mind that I did not intend. So my point is, a lot of the terminology here, it doesn't cross over from group to group. So sometimes it's just good to unpack that. Having said that, I'm going to go to Dr. Shadee. Dr. Shadee, feel free to speak about ilm al-kalam as I just raised it, but also this issue of ta'wil and tafwid, and your understanding from the Ashari perspective. As I said, my understanding is very, very clear. We have it in Jawharat al-Tawheed that, engage in tafwid or engage in ta'wil as long as you're aiming for tanzih. Now, Fadal Sayyid.
All right. So, like you said, our goal is tanzih. And I think these two manhaj, the Kalami manhaj and the Athari manhaj, are a lot closer than people imagine. If we say from the Hanbali madhab, their own books are giving explicit tanzih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from location and from body. So if I'm reading from Qala'id al-Aqyan, he has an entire chapter on the kufr of somebody who says Allah is everywhere or in any location. And he explains it because he says, هو الذي خلق المكان. He created all location. وهو كما كان قبل خلق المكان. And he is now as he was before he created location. So the tanzih of the Hanabila is crystal clear in their own books. They need to say nothing else. And he says, حكم التشبيه والتجسيم ولا يشبه. You cannot say he's similar to anything. ومن كمن اعتقد تعالى جسما فقد كفر. Whoever believes that Allah is a body, he's a kafir. Or he says he's a jism, لا كالأجسام. He's a body, not like other bodies. فقد كفر. So the Hanabila are crystal clear in their tanzih. So we're in 100% agreement on that. Now, let's turn and agree with the Hanabila on something else. Is that we will not make ta'wil except what may have been found with the Salaf, the first three generations. I have in front of me a document that has in it over 20 narrations of ta'wilat from Sahaba and from the Salaf. Let's hypothetically, just for the sake of argument, say it's all da'if. All right, it's all da'if, but what do we say about something that's da'if when you bring it all together? Is that not hasan li ghayrihi? Is that not give you an idea that that the Salaf did make ta'wilat of Quran? Let me read you one ta'wil that's narrated by Ibn Kathir. He says, Al-Bayhaqi narrates from Al-Hakim, from Amr ibn Sammak, from Ahmed ibn Hanbal himself, the ta'wil of Allah saying, وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ أَنَّهُ جَاءَ ثَوَابُهُ. Your Lord came in the Quran. Your Lord came with the angels rows and rows. جاء ربك والملك صفا صفا. قال أحمد بن حنبل ثوابه. جاء ثوابه. His reward has come. Al-Bayhaqi says هذا إسناد لا غبار عليه. This is an isnad. There is no dust on it. So I would say, I would agree with the Hanabila. If any ta'wil is going to be allowed, restrict yourself to the ta'wil of the first three generations. And by the way, saying that Imam Ahmed is not from the first three generations in the first place. So he may be taking from, he's from the fourth generation, right? He may be taking
third
from.
Third.
Am I correct about that? Yeah,
no, he's third.
He is third generation. Okay, sorry about that. So but point being, the point stands is that if we were to realize the Hanabila make absolutely explicit tanzih, and the Ash'ari can limit any and all ta'wilat, limit it to the early ulama, the narrations from the Sahaba and otherwise. And as Imam John said, all ta'wil is limited to the language. And literally what it means is to make something first. So this is the second possible meaning in the Arabic language. We're going to make it first, right? That's literally what it means. If a word has 5 different meanings, and the first one cannot be because it implicates, or the necessary implication is a location or a body, then we look at the second meaning. Okay. And we don't even need to do that because we're not doing ta'wil. So we don't even need usul al-ta'wil. Let's just, our usul, make it one usul, asl, which is the narrations of the previous scholars as narrated through the narrations that we have, and we have so many. So if we agree on that, then these two madhahib are very, very close to one another.
Shukran, Sayyidi, Allah bless you. And just to point out as well, the narration I mentioned from the Mustadrak of Imam Hakim, that is sahih according to Imam Dhahabi. So we do have definitively sahih narrations from Sahaba and others where they are making ta'wil. This is, I think, for some of the audience, that's going to be very, very important, because often the accusation is, oh, you guys are narrating ta'wilat and they're not sound, they're not authentic. But in the same narration, Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas, he himself said that if something is unclear to you, then go to the language of the Arabs. You see, so as both of you have stated already, that, you know, it's just not willy-nilly. We don't allow anybody to just, oh, this occurred to my heart, so this is the ta'wil. No. Has to be based on the Arabic language. But the reason I raise it in particular is that we have one of the greatest of the Sahaba, the greatest scholars of the Sahaba, Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. As we all know, the Prophet ﷺ prayed for him that Allah Most High gives him fiqh and ta'wil. And this blessed person is not only engaging in ta'wil himself, he's encouraging it. And this is what I, you know, in my discussions, this is what I often say to people who seem to be very, very staunchly against it. They say, if you make ta'wil, you're denying the attributes of Allah Most High, you're denying the Quran, and, you know, all kinds of things get said. And I hope things are not this heated across the pond. I hope things are more calmly discussed, inshallah. But here it sometimes gets very, very heated. People say things like, what are you saying? Allah Most High didn't have the ability to say it more clearly, and now you have to come and you have to interpret it on behalf of God subhanahu wa ta'ala. Really, really absurd arguments as far as I'm concerned, because that's an argument against interpretation anywhere in the Holy Quran, let alone a creedal interpretation anywhere in the Holy Quran. It completely disappears. But the point I try to make to such people is, look, you're not arguing against me. You're not against Noorud-deen here. You're against Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and many of the Salaf. We have narrations of that from Hassan al-Basri, we have from Imam Qatada, we have from Imam Mujahid. And then even if you go beyond that, some of the greatest scholars in our history, they made that weed. As people become shocked, because, you know, the people who are not necessarily scholars or haven't studied more deeply, when they hear a name like Bukhari, then that's more impactful for them than even if you name somebody from the Salaf itself. When they hear that, it's more impactful. And when you tell them, well, Imam Bukhari has that weed, it's a bit more shocking. It moves them a little bit further that, well, I can't consider Imam Bukhari to be a deviant. But in any case, sorry, Sheikh, Dr. Ahmed, I took a little bit of your time. Come back to yourself. Allah Most High bless you. So, sorry, I think you wanted to say something about Imam Ahmed and which generation he belongs to. And also, please do comment on the issue of Tafwid and Ta'wil within the Hanbali school.
And so, no, he is, I was just saying, like, it was just a passing comment, because he died in the year 200 something Hijri, right? And so that is considered
241, I believe. Yes,
241, and that is considered from the, like, you know, the third generation, because he was born in 163, if not 164, if I remember correctly, and then he died in 241. Wallahu alam. But anyway, in terms of the ta'wil. So I just want to mention quickly that, generally speaking, if you look at the Hanabila of how they classify the Sifat, they actually classify them into two categories, right? The Muhkam and Mutashabih. The whole aspect of discussion really happens regarding what's considered Mutashabih, which is for them, they're very specific what the Mutashabih means in that terminology when it comes to the attributes of Allah Ta'ala, is that it might indicate some sort of a tajbih, right? This is where they start having that discussion of whether ta'wil is permissible or not. And the default setting for them is actually ta'wil is haram, right? That's the default setting, right? They say ta'wil is impermissible. And the reason behind it is because this is how they understood the transmitted ijma' that they state that exists about not doing ta'wil of that category of al-mutashabih, right? And they took it that this tahrim is consistent, right? Is absolute in all time periods and in all situations. But they do make an exception. Like if you look in their books, they make an exception. So they say it's haram to do ta'wil, except, right? And they mention about three situations. They said unless it is mentioned from the Prophet ﷺ or from the Sahaba. And usually the third situation they place it in is when it has to do that if you describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a way that indicates some sort of deficiency or some negative attribute. And they give an example such as you can't call Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makr. You know, in the verse وَيَمْكُرُونَ يَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ, they said that you cannot do that because this is more of, in terms of a jaza, right, a reciprocation. And so you cannot call Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makr, so they negate that. So they do ta'wil in that aspect. And so beyond those three situations, the default setting is that it is, like, you know, haram, is prohibited, right? And then this, like, and you can see this from many books, even in the scholars of and like, you know, the Hanbali do some tafsir of the Quran and so forth. They kind of specifically kind of mention these. And Maghrib Karmi himself, like, you know, he mentions like, you know, can we do ta'wil or cannot do ta'wil in terms of the mutashabih and so forth. And they also, like, you know, mentioned, and one of the reasons why they don't do ta'wil, which is specify a meaning or a possible meaning, I should be more accurate, to specify a possible meaning, is because, like Imam Karmi, he said, because this will be a form of dhann, right? And a dhann could be correct or incorrect. And so this will be from the aspect or the gateway of going into speaking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without knowledge, right? This is why they're very, like, you know, and they're out of fear also, if you do this, then you would deviate in the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is called al-ilhad fi asma'illah wa sifat. So this is why they would say you don't do into this, you completely guard it, you protect it. The only exception is Prophet, Sahaba, and situations, the third situation where if you name or use that attribute indicates something that is negative, right? And it's based on all these evidence. So I just wanted to quickly summarize, like, you know, what Shaykh John had mentioned, but a bit more, kind of add a bit more details to it.
Okay, Sadie, now I'm going to stick with yourself for a moment now. So what you've said is the kind of default, there are exceptions, but the default is that ta'wil is haram.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Sadie. But that doesn't mean they take that further and say, therefore, anybody who's doing ta'wil is deviant outside of Ahl Sunnah, as I think we've already
No, because you have to, not every haram is
exactly.
Right? So even, and they actually state that, even, like, you know, the later scholars, even if they commit something that is considered muharram, right, it doesn't take them out of the realm of, like, you know, Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah, even if they call certain things bid'ah, right? They don't necessarily call the person who's doing it as a mubtada', because in the end, as the later scholars had mentioned, these are aspects of ijtihad. Their differences aren't things that are aspect. So I'm going to explain a bit further, right? So this is the point of the Hanbali school of thought, and they limited to this. Now, the Ashari Maturidiyya, they said essentially, why limit, like, you know, the ta'wil that the Prophet had mentioned and the Sahaba. This is an example that is permissible, and so they did qiyas essentially whenever necessary, right? That's the form of ijtihad. Yeah, that's the difference, really, the difference between two. Like, you know, the Hanabila, the Athar, they stuck to the Athar. They said, beyond this, we're not going to do that. The you know, the mutakallimin from Maturidiyya and the Ash'ara, actually, I shouldn't talk about Maturidiyya, like, you know, Ash'ara, I know a bit more about the Ash'ara, is that they use this as an example, right? They say, here, listen, it is permissible when need be, we can assign a possible meaning, and so why limit it to an attribute? We're going to do qiyas for the remainder of it, right? If you look at it this way, it's really completely ijtihad, right? We will disagree on it. We'll say, like, you know, no, you shouldn't do it. And the others say, no, we have the need to do it because time has changed, or people might have, like, you know, deviated. Purely intellectual ijtihadi discussion, right?
Yeah. This is important, Sadie. Thank you so much. Allah Masai bless you. Like, I'm guessing it, and I'm going to go to Shaykh John in a moment regarding this. So, firstly, I want to say that even in fiqh, regularly, you'll have one madhab considering something haram, and another madhab will not consider it haram. Okay, and we will say, okay, that's up to them. That's their ijtihad. They are not outside of Ahl Sunnah. So, because people may hear yourself saying, oh, the Hanbalis considered ta'wil as a default haram. Oh, therefore the Hanbalis don't consider the Asharis to be guided. They consider them misguided and consider them outside of Ahl Sunnah. This is why I came back to yourself just to clarify that point. No, we have this all of the time. one scholar, one imam, one sahabi considers something haram, another one considers it halal. And because it's, as you said, it's an ijtihadi issue, they're still upon guidance. They still consider each other upon guidance. They still consider each other within the mainstream now. But I'm going to just build on this a little bit and go to Sheikh John. Sayyidi, I would guess then, if that's the default position with the Hanbalis, that at times, some Hanbalis, when they're speaking about creed, they're going to speak quite strongly about it. You see, and they're going to speak in a fairly fiery manner against that wheel. If they consider it haram, it's only natural for them to do that. So, my first question is that the case? Have you come across that in the books and such things? And how would you explain to somebody who is of the Hanbali or Athari or Salafi creed, whatever you want to call it, that no, don't misunderstand that, doesn't mean that they consider the Ash'aris completely deviant?
Yeah, sure. Definitely come across that. And I think you'll find it what I would consider kind of like flare-ups at times. And a lot of the debate or the rigor of the debate or the heated nature of the debate is going to have some reasoning behind it. And you can find, I typically like to use the example of Ibn Qudama, rahimahullah ta'ala, in this, because he was very strong in terms of, his opposition to Ta'wil. And you can find that clearly documented in his books. Just pages and pages of argumentation about or refuting making Ta'wil, with the few exceptions that we mentioned. But on that note, Ibn Qudama went to fight for Salahuddin Ayyubi, participated in battles. I mean, he was wounded along with his family members that were from the Hanabila. So you can see there's this, as we've kind of hinted at, there's this academic rigor, there's this passion, of course, about your doctrine and your creed, your defense of it, even going on the offense of sorts, if you will. But at the end of all of that, there's still this level of cooperation. You can see he's not going to fight for some kafir. I mean, it's not that he's making takfir of somebody who is known to be and who was not Hanbali. Salahuddin, as I understand, was more affiliated with the Ashari. And so, yeah, I think that's a great living example, kind of a practical example of what it actually looks like. Because I think sometimes, especially in our audiences today or in our communities, we have a hard time understanding how you take these issues and then you live with them with other people. Yeah. And that's extremely important to have this, to be able to grasp this kind of working reality, so that you don't end up hating your brothers, or at the worst, like excommunicating them from the religion.
Yeah, Sayyidi, that's, Allah bless you. This is an excellent example, and to really emphasize that, look, scholars, obviously the academics, and anybody who's passionate about any position they hold, they will speak about it at times in a very passionate manner, in a very fiery manner. But the ultimate conclusion is no, despite that, they consider these people to be from Ahl Sunnah. You see, I have a lot of discussions, and sometimes quite fiery discussions, with a lot of people, and I strongly disagree with certain things that they say. But if they were to say, would you pray behind this person? I say, yes, no problem, inshallah ta'ala. But I think that's very, very important, because what happens, especially people who want to flame and increase the kind of division we have, what they will do, they will pick up statements like some of the statements Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi may have made, and others besides, and they say, look, this is what we feel about them, you see. And you can have it in other fields as well. It's not restricted to creed alone. And I think the job,
we've gotten into conversations over wiping over socks that have gotten more bloody than the issues over Aqida.
Yeah, but that's precisely the point, that people who want to divide us for whatever reason, maybe, I'm not saying they always have bad intentions. They might believe everybody else is Ahl Bid'ah, other than they don't want to bring everybody to Ahl al-Haq. But that's what they tend to do. And I've seen this, especially with the attacks we get against the Ashari creed here, people will find a statement which, to a person who hasn't studied Ashari Aqida, that statement seems terrible. They'll say, Fakhruddin al-Razi, he said the aql comes before the revelation. Aql is superior to revelation. Any person who doesn't know the background to that and where that's coming from, they'll think, oh my God, are these people even Muslim? And they put their own intellects before the Holy Quran. So that's my point. People will pick statements and they'll fan the flame, of fitna, and it's our duty then to say, no, despite him saying that, he still done this. Despite him saying that, he still believed this. Despite him saying that, he said, this is academic passion, or this is passion for your particular position. It's not in reality believing everybody is deviant but you. Sheikh Shadee, I'm going to come to yourself now, and obviously feel free to comment on anything we've discussed. But I also would like to add something to this as well, and I'd take it in a slightly different discussion. I'm going to come to the others with this in a moment. I strongly feel if you engage in ta'wil and you're quite comfortable with it, when it comes to new students or even the awam, it's a lot easier to get them to a place of tanzih. You see, when they say, what does the hand of Allah mean? What does it mean that Allah Most High is established on the throne? What does that mean? And I find it a lot easier when I say, well, okay, a possible interpretation is this, that, okay, mashallah, that's cleared everything up for me. Whereas I think with tafwid, that's going to be a little bit more difficult. But sorry, Sadie, you comment on anything before, and then if you like, comment on that, and then I'll come to the others as well.
Yeah, so I think the most important point that what Imam John was saying, and even the contentions that Dr. Ahmed mentioned earlier, is that what is the level of the contention? This is one of the things I always say, that we have to elevate our level of our discourse. What is the level of this contention? Is this a contention that is based on qata', meaning if you go against this, you're out of Islam? Because issues are that. Is this one of those issues? If somebody was to say there's a prophet after Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's a level of contention that puts us, you're out of it. This is Islam or kufr. Okay. Or somebody, for example, who says that you actually don't have to believe in the prophet, you just respecting him, you're a mu'min. Perennialist, for example. Or are we talking about another level of contention? Let's say, was the Isra and Mi'raj a dream? Were the Sahaba righteous, such as Abu Bakr and Umar, or did they betray the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and harm Sayyidina Ali and Sayyidah Fatima afterwards on purpose? You're now talking about al-bid'ah al-mufassiqa. You're going to be out of Ahl Sunnah. We will deem salah behind you and camaraderie with you sinful. Or are we talking about khilaf? What is the most correct opinion? Or what is the most appropriate opinion? Because so that level of khilaf, and I think the whole purpose of your unity panels is to show that some people have taken what's at that level really valid differences of opinion and have brought them to the bigger levels of contention of putting someone outside of Ahl Sunnah. That's where I think the main point that has to be driven home is, even for us, ta'wil is not a rukn of aqeedah for us. It's just something that has narrations and that are acceptable. And then, as Dr. Ahmed said, the Hanabila have different constrictions on it, constraints upon it. Okay. Even if we were to talk about the narrations, because narrations always, you say, Bayhaqi says, La ghubar alay. Well, somebody's going to say, Bayhaqi is not the final say. I'm going to tell you there's ghubar on it, right? Or someone is going to contend it. And Malik has ta'wilat of his nuzul. Someone goes, I don't like his sanad, the sanad that brings that narration down from Malik, although it's from a Dhahabi. But and even Dhahabi discusses it. He says it's up for discussion. The asanid are up for discussion even. So we may even differ on the isnad. Did he say it? Did he not say it? Is it a strong sanad? Not strong. But where is the location of this khilaf? This khilaf is a location where wherever we end up, whoever is right and wrong, if an angel was to come down and say, you're right, he's wrong, is his wrongness put him outside of Ahl Sunnah? That's the question. Yeah. And that's where the most important element of this whole discussion is. So that's, I think, what we have to emphasize.
No, shukran, Sayyidi. Any experience regarding what I said? People come to you with questions, and then, you know, regarding descriptions of Allah Most High. And
I'm telling you, the fastest thing, when you do tafweed and you say, well, the first thing we do is we have to negate that Allah has a body or is in a location. And all the three madhabs agree upon that. That satisfies to some degree. But like you said, if you were to say, for example, what does it mean Allah comes? It means his reward comes. That actually closes any tashbih in their mind completely.
I find it more effective now, Sayyidi.
Well, 100% it's effective. Now, here's the thing. You have to say it could mean, as Dr. Ahmed said, it's speculation. But speculation, yeah, and if, for example, alif lam mim, you find so many tabari, you find so many speculations there. So you can have a ruling on it. It could be haram to make such a speculation, or you can permit making such a speculation as long as you recognize it's a speculation. I mean, one of them, I was even shocked when I first, every one of us studied alif lam mim, Allahu a'lam, and that's it. You move on to theological kitab, right? But when you read Tabari, you'll be surprised. So some of the Salaf said ta'wilat that were surprising to you. Alif lam mim, it means Allahu latifun majid. Where did they get that from, right? So it's dhan, it's speculation, but they're telling you it's dhan.
I'm amongst those who are going to question the asanid there, Sayyidi.
Then go talk to Tabari then. And Tabari, by the way, just because something's in Tabari doesn't mean he's stamping it. He's just telling you.
He said in his introduction, Sayyidi, I can't remember if it was his tarikh or his tafsir. He said, look, I've given you the asanid. I'm not telling you they're authentic.
SubhanAllah. That's the most phenomenological way to do it. Just this, I'm just telling you this is what exists, and you can go and make a judgment. Yeah, so that is the same concept. He's saying it could be, Allah knows best. Could mean this and it could mean, and even better for us, so and so narrated that Malik said it's his affair that comes down, or so and so said that Ibn Abbas said X. That is the safest route to go, and you can judge it the isnad all you want.
Now, Dr. Ahmed, if I come to yourself now, and again, feel free to speak about anything else that has been discussed so far, but my direct question is this one, the practical one. I want to make this more practical now. Have you come across a student? I'm guessing, say that you teach Aqida, I'm not completely sure, but where, you know, they're a little bit unclear regarding a description, Yadullah, Istiwa, whatever it may well be, Saqullah, and you've kind of helped them through that. Has that been a practical experience that you've had? Say you're on mute.
Alhamdulillah. So I do, like, alhamdulillah, I do teach Aqida, but my teachings are always like, you know, within the parameters of, like, you know, the Hanbali Athari. And so when it comes to these things, I go through the entire methodology of, like, you know, affirming the attribute, right? Negating any sort of similarity. And then when it comes to those specific one, we, like, you know, explain the whole aspect of tafwid, right? That just because it's similar to how we do not know the true essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we do not know the true, like, you know, essence and meaning and conceptualize these attributes, especially when we talk about the mutashabih. And that usually settles very well with I actually haven't had any sort of trouble with any of my students when I teach them that aspect, just because like, you know, I feel, Wallahu alam, it seems like very easy, very natural, especially when you point out, similar to how we don't truly understand the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know there's nothing similar to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so these, like, you know, attributes, the way you understand them is there's nothing like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They do have a meaning, right? But it's not the meaning that, like, you know, you immediately kind of, that comes to your mind, that is similar to the creation and so forth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not his creation. It has a meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows of, right? And that essentially is what tafwid is when it comes to those aspects of the attributes. And it's a tafwid of the meaning and not tafwid of the sifa itself. We don't say that, we don't know if it's an attribute or not. No, we affirm it's an attribute, right? But anyway, that's usually, like, you know, when it comes to those aspects or like, you know, things that they mention, And of course, like, when you come to the discussion of, there's always that heated discussion when they first start, like, when you go into Ta'wil al-Haram or the Shaykh Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And so honestly, that discussion I've had a lot, right? And this is usually how I kind of move through it, wallahu alam. Now, of course, mashallah, like, some of them read very well, and they start bringing, like, some statements, like, where does Imam Ahmed say some of these things? And then, like, I point out to the narrations where he says, la tafsir wa la ma'na, right? You don't interpret it, tafsir, and you don't give it a ma'na, a meaning, right? And you would say, la ta'wil wa la tafsir wa la ma'na, straight up. And so people who want narrations from, like, the authentic narrations of books of narrated from, like, first few generations, those are the things you can to understand, right? Like, some of the other great imams, when they say, like, ta'wilahu tilawata, right? Or, like, tafsirahu tilawata, like, its explanation is your just recitation of it. So just say it and go, right? That kind of thing is usually indicates the whole aspect of, like, proving that the tafweed aspect of the Hanabila, how they deal with it. Wallahu alam.
Shukran Sayyid, mashallah, because obviously I'm more inclined towards that weed when it comes to direct questions. I hadn't heard that before. That's a very, very good way of doing it. Allah Most High bless you. And look, can we really delve into the essence of Allah Most High? So we can't delve into this description. Allah Most High bless you. And one thing I will say, although I am convinced that weed works far, far better, especially for people who are at the beginning, but one thing I will say without doubt, I do prefer, if the weed works, I prefer that 100%. Without doubt. Why? Because the tafweed has more taslim, has more submission in it. You see, just I don't know, Allah Most High knows best. I'm happy with that. I submit to Allah Most High. And ultimately, that's one of our major goals. Tanzeeh is a huge goal, of course, and taslim is also a beautiful goal. Sheikh John, I'm going to put the same question to you, but add a little bit to it. Again, I don't know if you do any dawah to non-Muslims or you even have debates or exchange with them, but I did come across a video at a time where there was one of the dawah figures here in the UK, and he was speaking to a Christian, and they were discussing, and it seems this person had maybe been watching a lot of the dawah figures videos, and he knew that he engages in tafweed, okay, and he'll say things like, well, this is in a manner that befits His Majesty regarding Allah Most High. Oh, this is the case in a manner that befits His Majesty. He put it like that. And then the Christian said to him, okay, fine. You're saying that it's impossible for God to come onto earth as a man. What if I say He can come onto earth in a manner that befits His Majesty? You see, it's kind of
get out of jail free card. Yeah.
So yeah,
it's a get out of jail. Say whatever you want, but in a manner that
that's the point. And he was
why I mentioned the Hanabila don't allow this based on their books. There's an explicit negation of location and jismiyah. So
I have a lot of it. Well, not with non-Muslims. I've not gotten into a discourse like this. Normally, it's much more fundamental, much more basic. It sounds like the guy was studying up and finding some ammo to use. And that is good ammo to use if you find somebody speaking on behalf or representing Islam, using it in that way, such that they would say, like, we affirm the meaning of these attributes, like Allah's hand in the literal sense of the word, in a manner befitting His Majesty. Or if they were to affirm the istiwa, and they were to say it in a literal meaning, like the ascension above the throne, or settling upon the throne, or a nuzul, descending in a manner befitting His Majesty. And so what is happening is you're taking two phrases that don't belong together, and you're smashing them together as if it's going to produce some type of real delicious fruit. It's totally rotten. It's spoiled. I mean, you're saying one thing and then you're negating it with the other part of the phrase. So when you say we're affirming the meaning in this literal way, in a manner befitting His Majesty, well, His Majesty dictates that that's not what it is.
Subhanallah. That's beautiful.
So I mean, that's the extent of, I mean, sometimes, the discourse can go on. And normally what I'll end up doing is I try not to get so passionate about it, because I know that that it doesn't go very far. is I'll just say, listen, man, this is what the Hanabila say. That's what I'm telling you. I'm not making it up. If you like it, you like it. If you don't like it, then. But this is the problem that I have currently. The problem that I have is that you have people that will, especially they'll come to me because they know my background, they know where I went to school at, and they have a number of assumptions about me. And when I disappoint them, unfortunately, they become very worried and upset. And they're trying to impose a particular framework on top of what, for example, the Hanabila have adopted or have formulated, I should say. They're bringing another framework and putting it on time, saying, no, this is what the Hanbalis say. And Dr. Ahmed kind of alluded to that. They'll come with certain narrations. They'll pick something from here, something from there. And they'll say, look, like, how could you say this? You're misrepresenting. And the fact of the matter is, I'm just giving you the narrations. I mean, from the early era of the Hanabila, from Imam Ahmed throughout the middle era to the latter era, you can find the issues all documented, and they're expressed in a multitude of different ways within the school. You'll find that the great imams expressed the same thing in different ways. You know, if we're talking about the issue of tafwid, you know, they would, and taslim, for example, there's like explicit language, like you have to make tafwid. And among the imams, especially that are revered in certain circles, like Imam al-Barbahari, for example, in his book, he's explicit in mentioning tafwid. It's not like a deduction that I'm making based on language. He says tafwid, and don't make tafsir bihawak, by your desires. Okay, and there are other scholars that mention the word tafwid explicitly with the understanding that you're going to relegate, you make an affirmation of the meaning, but you're going to relegate what it is, the definition of that meaning, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then they have other ways of dealing with the issue, like imrar, which means to pass over, to traverse over something. Yeah, that you pass over these attributes. And interestingly enough, you'll find that from the greats of the Hanabila, of course, there are issues there that could be debated about Ibn al-Jawzi in terms of his doctrinal views. But he defines imrar, what that means explicitly. He says that when we understand imrar, because sometimes people will say to traverse over it means to traverse over it with its literal meaning. He says what imrar means is al-jahl bi muradihi, al-jahl bi tafsirihi. Right? You don't know its intended meaning. You don't know its explanation. Right? So these are just, alhamdulillah, these are just some of the ways that the Hanabila, they would express the same concept. And all of these types of terms you'll find throughout the generations. It's not just al-mutaakhirun, right? Because that's one of the things that I also run into in this discourse is, well, listen, this is particular to the mutaakhirin, the latter generation, because they were affected by kutub al-asha'ira, right? Because that's another one of the points that I thought was important to mention about the level of respect, this working relationship, is that a lot of the great scholars from the Hanbali tradition, they read and they studied from, you know, the works of the Ashariya. It didn't mean that they then transported and imported those concepts. It's just that was a part of the scholarship, is that this is what's being taught, and this is what there's obviously some benefit there. And they were learning these things while also maintaining their own doctrinal views and positions.
You see, I'm glad you said this, because sometimes I share with brothers Hanbali quotes, and I share and these quotes you said about tafwid, very explicit tafwid. Yes. And this is very explicit tanzih that I just read earlier from Qala'id al-Aqyan. So they say these are the neo-Hanbalis and these are the Ashari Hanbalis. I'm like, where are you making stuff up from? Right? Even one of them, when I gave the ayat and a hadith that would indicate that Allah does not have a location or a body, they said, oh, this is Ash'ari's trying to actually prove a Greek system of the divine. Well, that completely fails when the Maturidis and the Hanabila say the same thing. So I think that it's important what you mentioned, because a lot of people will say, these are the mutaakhirin, they got influenced, as if their books got dirtied and muddied by other people's ideas. So your classification is much,
I just don't mean to cut you off, but actually the reason I mentioned these statements from Ahmed ibn Hanbal and some of the pious predecessors is exactly the same as Sheikh John mentioned. And if you look at some of the comments, I was kind of busy kind of looking through the comments, kind of interesting. They literally say this: why are you referring to latter scholars and not the the previous salaf? But one thing they fail is that in the Hanbali school thought, literally it's a chain of narration all the way to Ahmed ibn Hanbal, right? This is what it is, and it's not just one scholar, two scholars. It's generation of scholars that take the statements of Ahmed ibn Hanbal and even his students and the ones that above that, right? And this is how they understood it, integrated it, and so forth, right? It's exactly the same argument of, why don't you take the fiqh straight from the narrations of the Sahaba or the the Salaf and so forth? It's a good idea, but everything has been filtered. There's a process. There's all these things, and whatever's not being understood or weak has been eliminated and so forth. But one thing, and also the whole claim of the Hanabila as being affected by Ash'ara, by the way, that bothers the Hanabila a lot, right? Mm-hmm. They're very sensitive to this.
It should.
Abd al-Baqi, himself, when he in Al-Ain and Athar, right? When he was talking about how there's three groups, and he said they are three groups, right? They're not one, they're three, and they said right? And using the waw indicates that they're separate. And he said, how is it even possible to put the Hanabila into the Ash'ara, right? He's upset about this. They're not affected, different methodologies, different situations. Yes, they can come to similar conclusions using different approaches, and yes, because of those they will differ, right? But they're not the same, right? And the claim that they were affected by it, in terms of maybe affected of understanding each other's language a bit more, that is true, right? The more the discussions happen, the more they start understanding, okay, we're discussing this from a different point, perhaps he meant this and perhaps he meant that. This is why you even have sometimes some of the Hanbalis making a hashiyah on some of the Safariniyya, the Aqida Safariniyya. Some of the Hanbali scholars made a footnote on it, but when they're doing the footnotes, they're obviously explaining the Hanbali point of view of it, right? Mm-hmm. But to that point, right? Once again, yes, it's very normal, and there will be flare-ups. There'll be as times appears. Okay, now clarity. I understand what you mean. This is your language that you're using. This is the language I'm using. This is where we're coming from. Okay, we can agree on this. We can disagree on this, and so forth. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that you'll find in the comments there pretty interesting things that we're going to talk about. Where's the statement of the Salaf? Why are they using the latter books? And that's why I purposely made that statement about Ahmed Hanbal had mentioned, right? Or even before that, what they had mentioned, that it is consistent with the Hanbali opinion, for example, of how they deal with these things. Allah.
The takfir keeps going to the edge, and I've seen a comment here I've never seen before. Honestly, this guy innovated. He said the Atharis and the Ash'aris and the Atharis are both misguided. So who's left for this guy?
He's gonna set up a new one.
Yeah. Who's left?
Yeah, that's one of the, by the way, that's one of the things that I incorporate when I'm teaching this topic, is to go through the various stages or the eras of the Hanabila from the beginning to the middle and through the end, and highlighting what it is that they said and how they're in alignment. And you'll find it's a consistency throughout. It's not that there's always agreement on everything, because you will find among the Hanabila there are a few here and there that develop their own conclusions, but the general understanding, without doubt, full confidence, is that there's this alignment, because what they're doing is transmitting. They're transmitting the doctrine from their Imam. And the Hanabila, they were very loyal to Imam Ahmed and honest when it came to those transmissions. And that's typically how you'll find they open their books. For example, Dr. Ahmed's talking about Al-Ain al-Athar, Abd al-Baqi's book. He opens and he says, this is the transmitted doctrine from Imam Ahmed. Ibn Hamdan's book is the same thing. This is the transmitted doctrine from Imam Ahmed. And And then they begin to spell that out. And you'll see, as he alluded to, and this is one of the points that I always try and mention to people when I'm teaching it, is that there's always an evolution to these things in terms of how they're explained, or in terms of certain judgments and positions that are taken upon opposition. As we talked about the differences between the Hanabila and the Ashari in terms of Ta'wil, etc. And you find that in certain stages of history, the arguments may have been a little stronger, the position may have been a bit stronger, but then as there's this ihtikak, if you will, which is contact with one another and contact with each other's material, and a better understanding begins to develop as to what's the intent, you said yourself, Noorud-deen, the terminologies. What do you mean by these terms that are being used? Then eventually things begin to become clearer, such that the positions and the rulings, if you will, or the judgments that are passed, they begin to change over time. You know, at one point I thought what you meant was this, and then years down the road, now I understand, well, wait a minute, because I actually investigated into your books, asked your scholars, I've understood your perspective, and now I'm saying, well, actually, that's not quite as bad as I initially thought it to be. In fact, it might be a little bit more congruent or in line with what we believe, though there might be some, difference in terms of how we arrive to the conclusions or what's possible within that realm. So yeah, that's why some people they get harp on that. Why are you quoting from mutaakhirin? And I'm going, look, the mutaakhirun, they've done so much in service of the religion. It's the same thing with the madhab al-fiqhi. I mean, the Hanabili aren't taking their madhab from the mutaqaddimin. I mean, like, we're not using that as the definitive conclusion. Yeah. Because it's a process. It's a process by which, the madhab is developed. It's not like it's altered, but you're having scholars contribute to build something complete. And that's what I think is important for people to keep in mind when we're referring to the various different eras. And then we're also, relying heavily on what the latter generations have said in their conclusions.
Yeah, I don't think there's any madhab that their mufta bihi book, if they were to select one or two or three books that if you study these, then you can answer questions on the madhab. All of those books are mutaakhirin books. None of them will say, here is Shafi'i's book on this. If you read it and study it and memorize it, you can give fatwa in the Shafi'i school. Nobody says this for any of the four madhabs. They're all relying on the principles set forth, many of the furu'a set by the imam, but then the scholars over generation answered what was not asked, brought together or made tafsil on certain statements of their imam, brought the exceptions, added the all of what you said, the development of the madhab into what it is. So everyone's relying on mutaakhirin.
Okay, bismillah. So we've been going for almost an hour and 20 minutes, so we're going to start closing up now. But Sheikh John, something that you mentioned, I think this is very, very important, that when you teach creed, you do refer back to the early scholars as well, despite the fact that, as you've articulated, the later scholars are representing the early scholars anyway. It's not like some departure. It's not, they've contradicted them. But this is something I feel is very, very important. And as teachers, we have to be a little bit flexible regarding. You have to know your audience. You have to know the kind of notions they're coming with, the opposition they're coming with, and you do have to deal with that too. We have touched upon fiqh, so if I just briefly mention it from that perspective, being a Hanafi, we've had an onslaught against us from those who don't follow madhab, say, oh, they don't have evidence, they don't have Quran supporting them, they don't have hadith supporting them. So even when I'm teaching a matan, I will bring it in. It doesn't mean it's going to be a full analysis of adillah constantly, but I will bring it in. And I think this is quite important as a teacher. What's the contentions people are bringing, and you deal with it. Because if you just become rigid, well, you kind of uphold for them the contention they have. If you only quote the mutaakhirun and you don't demonstrate how this is absolutely in line, it can cause that problem. And as I said, I want to wrap up, but one more thing I wanted to say. and I don't think this has really come up, just like in fiqh, although the madhahib might differ regarding taking a rukhsa, etc., taking from other madhabs, but I feel rather than there being this tension, okay, who's right? Is it Maturidis? Is it Asharis? Is it Hanbalis? Is it, is it this, which ones are upon the haqq? We should see this as a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'll give you a practical example. I have a student of mine, very close to me, studied a lot with me. And when it comes to taklif and the mukallaf, who is responsible, who's not, who will be judged for his deeds and actions on the Day of Judgment and who won't, I'm very, not strictly, but I'm completely convinced of the Ashari position that unless the message of Islam has come to you, you are not mukallaf. I'm absolutely convinced by it, especially since we have in the Holy Quran, وَمَا كُنَّا مُعَذِّبِينَ حَتَّى نَبْعَثَ رَسُولًا. I'm convinced by it. Okay? But a particular student of mine was not. And he was heavily inclined towards the original Maturidi position that even if the message of Islam hasn't come to you, you are still mukallaf. And ultimately, we had a discussion, and ultimately I said, there's no issue here. You're much more comfortable and at ease with that position. Why do I need you to why do I need to force you onto my position? This is valid. It helps you be, have greater certitude and conviction regarding a certain aspect of the deen. Bismillah, carry on. Why do we need to fight with this? So I say, Dr. Shadee.
Yeah, I'd like to make a couple of very important points, like pulling this all together. First of all, like you said, if Allah's words allowed two meanings, who are you to close it to one? In fact, you should be advancing all of the possible valid meanings that Allah's word and his messenger's word allow for, because that's one of the meanings of utitu jawami'ul kalim. It's one of the meanings, the fact that you have different possibilities and implications of ihtimalat of a word. If there's 2, 3, 4, and 5, you should allow for all of them. There's a fa'idah and benefit in the world for all of them. That's number one. Number two, something that my sheikh from he's from Mauritania said, and the Mauritanians 100% are Malikiyah, right? So one time we were sitting and someone joked that the Malikiyah, we're nahnu al-Malikiyah, right? And he said, la, don't never say that. And we in Mauritania, we never say this, right? Just your identity is Muslim. And then Maliki is simply a tool that you're using to understand. That's all. And it's a sanad that you have. That's it. So identity has to be Muslim. Number three, we have to recognize the personal purpose of religion. On Yawm al-Qiyamah, Allah doesn't ask us about any of these masail. He asks us about what these masail lead to, which is amal al-salih, al-qalb al-salim, etc. So our personal goal of nearness to Allah Ta'ala, if your job is to make it to the end line of a race, the color of your sneakers are irrelevant. The brand of your shirt is irrelevant. So if that's our goal, if we truly understand our goal with Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, any shirt that covers me from the sun and the rain suffices. Any sneaker suffices. You have
as long as you got a shirt on, brother. As long as you're wearing a shirt
on. That's it. You got to have a shirt on. No, they can't have la madhabiyya, right? Right? That's why we want to open it, but not too open. You can't have no madhab at all, no taqleed at all, right? And make yourself your sheikh. So you have to have any one of these 4 madhahib and any one of these 3 aqaid, and then go use it now. Act upon it, right? Go act upon it. Half of the lovers of 99% of the lovers of Abdul Qadir al-Jailani, they're not even aware he's a Hanbali in the first place. In aqaid, he's a Hanbali. A man came and said, teach me ilm al-kalam. He said, la yanfa'uka fi qabrik. It's not going to benefit you in your grave, right? And he's our number one, right? Imam Abdul Qadir al-Jailani in matters of suluk. We have to bring the path to Allah in front of us, and then any of the 4 madhabs that's valid, let's start acting upon it. Number 4, finally, we have to remember the value of our coming together as imams and all of the intellectual leaders and the scholars coming together is to enact iqamat ad-din, and is to tawheed as-sufuf, so that the Iblis does not win by infighting and distracting us from this while people are going astray in high schools, in colleges, leaving Islam altogether in the West, getting butchered and slaughtered in the East, right? So what is the personal value of learning of these four madhabs? Yalla, take one and go, which every single one of them is valid and good and will lead you to huda. Number two, these imams have the imam and the intellectual leaders have to come together to solve community problems. And this is a big fitna from Iblis and tahrish. Prophet ﷺ warned us. Iblis knows you're never going to worship idols, but he knows he can get you on tahrish. Ya'isa an ya'budahu al-musallun. The religious people are not going to worship Iblis, but the religious people can argue amongst themselves. And we really have to band together and seal off al-ghulu bid-din. We have to seal off on one side ghulu, on one side the modernism and the liberalism on the other side. Right. And then we could do iqamat ad-din as best as we can in our communities and in the globe. Our goal should be the whole globe.
Shukran Shadee, I think that serves perfectly as your final comments. Allah bless you. So I'm going to move to the other two sheikhs, inshallah. I apologize. I'm going to ask Shaykh Ahmed a question, and I'm going to have to disappear. I'll be back in a few minutes, but if I'm not, then Shaykh John, if you also just essentially give your final comments. But I want to throw something in there as well as any other final comments that you have. So what I'm often troubled by is people who are Ashari, if you like, they study Ashari Aqida, they have a massive misunderstanding. They will come to me and they will say to me, Salafis are kafir. Salafis are this. I'll say, why? They say, because they say Allah Most High has a hand. Because they say Allah Most High has a face. Okay, just that statement alone, not that a hand like a person, a face like a person, etc. They simply saying that makes them kafir, makes them deviant. They're certainly outside of Ahlul Sunnah, but they're kafir as well, right? And the way I deal with that, I show them prominent imams who have said this kind of thing. So I will show them, for example, Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala in Al-Fiqh Al-Akbar, he mentioned وَلَهُ يَدٌ وَوَجْهٌ وَنَفْسٌ, and he has a hand. And if you want to translate it, and a face and a nafs. I'm not going to translate nafs, okay? But the point is, I'll show that to them. They're, oh my God, I didn't realize. So, okay, if I take that harsh position, then I'm saying Abu Hanifa is also deviant and a kafir. Now, so this is a way I find very, very effective. Alhamdulillah, it's worked very well for me to take people away from these extremes. And to recognize that, look, if a person engages in tafwid, many of our great imams have, it's, as I've mentioned already, it's within the Ashari tradition. And many of our great imams have said exactly what you are calling kufar. So if the both of you, when you comment, please, if you could comment on things people say about Asharis, which are actually non-issues, and how do you convince them that they are non-issues and there's nothing wrong with what the Asharis are saying here?
طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So alhamdulillah, I don't think I've or at least minimally experienced anybody claiming that the Ash'ari are disbelievers, right? The majority that the conversation we have is that they're not from Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah. So unfortunately, like, you know, as a Hanbali Athari, we get more of the harsher treatment, right? Of being accused of being a mujassim, a kafir, or all these things, or deviant. And I'm going to start with, I think mainly the problem is that some of these topics are being discussed to the public, right? And as Dr. Shadee had mentioned, this is this stuff essentially, when we're talking about them, what is important for you to enter into Jannah? Generally speaking, these topics should not be discussed in public. It's not a public discourse. It's more of a intellectual student of knowledge. And you study it properly, then you come up with a bit more of a healthy, balanced situation. So when some of the people come to me and say, how are the Ash'ari from, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they exactly, they're like Jahmiyyah, they're exactly like the Mu'tazila and how they deal with certain things. And so the way I kind of approach it, I say, okay, so calm down, right? So let's discuss this. Why are they out of Sunnah, Ahl Sunnah Jama'ah, right? And they say, well, because they don't affirm the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And essentially, this is mainly the discussion that happens. And I say, okay, fine. So what are attributes they don't affirm? Do they say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like they don't affirm, for example, Sam' al-Basar, right? Al-Ilm al-Haya, al-Qudra. They say, no, they do affirm these. I'm like, okay, so what do they deny, right? They said they deny things such as al-Yad. I said, well, did they say that Allah has no Yad? Or what did they say? And so they say Allah has no Yad. I'm like, are you sure? Is that what you read, right? And so part of the biggest problem is a lot of it is just more of them hearing things without really going to the sources. If you ever open a book in the Ashari school of thought, they'll never say Allah does not have a yad, right? They will do ta'wil, right, in that process. But essentially, when they do ta'wil, essentially they are saying that it could possibly mean, and they give another attribute, right? So they don't deny that. And so this is how I usually kind of try to address it, but also, like, point out to the fact, as like, Shaykh Noorud-deen had mentioned, there are other scholars that they respect and value that lean towards that, right? And like major scholars, such as, for example, Imam al-Nawawi, right, or Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, or so forth, people that they're like, oh my God, no, they must have not understood. And actually, this is kind of the worst excuses I hear. Like, they're not experienced in it, right? And I'm like, okay, listen, you were arguing about, you're saying that this is qat'iyat, that this is basic, that this is all this in front. You think they're gonna just not see this or understand this? And let's be a bit more like, realistic about what you're trying to say, right? Even the whole claim about this is like, their environment. Sheikh, this is like belittling the minds of generations of scholars, right? Intellectuals. And I hate this part of like, the discussion. I might not know, or like, oh, they might have meant this, or whatever the case is, right? But the reality is, like, there are many scholars throughout history, starting from like, al-Baqillani, for example, right? Baqillani, who many, by the way, of the Atharis, they do appreciate him and they value him, right? But he's known as a Ashari, right? And so when you bring that dimension, is that other scholars are involved, some people you love, and those are two generations. Like, what are you going to do with all these scholars, right? Are you going to say that they all don't know what they're doing? Or like, we're talking about, once again, many of the scholars believe that when it comes to aspects of Aqida, like, you have to exert your, like, effort and find out the true aspects of it, built on knowledge and so forth. So you tell me all these individuals are just imitating and have no brain and don't understand what they're saying. And so I kind of bring it from that direction, but also try to clarify why they would do certain ta'weed, for example. But I also point out to these individuals, for example, and I kind of push and I say, okay, yad, for example, right? What is it, right? And essentially they're forced to do one or two things, right? They're forced either to go to tafwid, or they're forced to go to tajbih, right? And the minute they start, like, they start hesitating, they start going to tajbih, right? They say, like, al-yad ma'luma. I'm like, okay, what does ma'luma mean? Like, what is it? Explain it, right? And so then they'll be forced, essentially, they say, like, yaliq bi jalali. I'm like, okay, of course yaliq bi jalali. Right? We're not disagreeing, but what does it mean? And so they're definitely going to be forced to tafwid. I was like, and that is like, and the Ash'ari will agree with tafwid. The Hanbalis and the Atharis will talk about tafwid in this aspect. But to say that, like, the ta'wil leads a person to al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and that's not necessarily true. So I kind of bring them up from that discussion as much as best as I can. And alhamdulillah, like, I've been very, like, I would say moderately to very successful with it. It kind of course harms that there's always inputs from other places, right?
Yeah.
And stuff like that. Wallahu alam.
Thank you for saying that. And there is a Hanbali Reflections Telegram channel. I'm sure you're part of it. But he also cited what you said. Qadi Abu Ya'la holds that the ta'wil of the Ashara is a form of acceptance, is an indicator of acceptance, because you cannot make a ta'wil of something you don't believe in.
Yes, that's true, because you accept it as an attribute, essentially.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay, Dr. Sorry, Sheikh John. You are now Doctor. You clarified. Allah bless you. Surrounded by too many doctors today.
I think he's got better than a PhD. These PhDs know nothing. Wallahi, they know nothing. PhD in theology, they know nothing. I'm sorry. I'm sure someone's going to get offended by that, but 90% of Islamic studies PhDs straight in the recycling bin.
Recycling bin's not too bad.
Let's not open a can of worms.
Yeah, let's not open a can of worms. But
No, I've always considered it. It's always one of those things in the back of my mind. Let me just go ahead and do that terminal degree so I can say if I'm finished.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say probably my closing thoughts here, just in terms of an approach to helping people navigate through these issues, is being cool. Number one, I think it's our job as religious leaders is to set a standard of energy or reactivity, because a lot of times people are coming with a high level of emotion. They've attached a tremendous amount of emotion to particular issues. They're like hot topics. And so I typically respond in a very cool manner. I don't need you to flatter me. That's number one. So if I'm not in it to win it, meaning to win you, if you walk away from me calling me a name or labeling me, I'm not personally hurt by it. I might get frustrated because, you know, the engagement might be a little bit off-putting, but I'm not in this for flattery. So you can keep your opinion. You can, I don't know, whatever. So helping set a tone by saying, look, it seems like Dr. Ahmed's kind of along the same, everybody seems to be along the same route there. Like, let's bring it down a notch. This isn't a life or death thing. Are you on fire right now? Is somebody burning right now? That we have to like really spring into action this way. Because I've had a few encounters. It's very enthusiastic. And then it's just about, listen, here's the presentation of what's out there. Okay. Let me give you the information. We've all alluded to that. Look, it's not me. Here are the books, because there's this phenomenon that's present, I think, in a lot of our circles, and that is there's a gap in terms of scholarship of time, where at least I'm very familiar with this with my background. There's the companions, there's the Prophet ﷺ, the companions, the three generations, and then there's always this huge jump. I don't know anything about what's happened in this point, and then I might have one stop here on the road, and then now I'm in my modern day. Okay, so I have this huge gap where I have no idea who are the names, what are the reference works, what's happening. So I just have 2 or 3 points of reference. One of the references is raw material. I have no tools to be able to sift and synthesize that, number one, though I'd really love to. And that would be my motto, is go back to this or the original source. I don't have the tools. That's no adequate tools to filter through and synthesize all of that. And then the other thing I have is one point of reference here at some point in time, and then maybe now I'm familiar with what's happening online and what's being popularized through various channels or agencies, and being pushed on the public. And so a lot of people are just simply unaware. There's just this general lack of awareness of what that these topics have been discussed and dealt with, and how they've been handled. And so typically that's what I do is I just say, listen, here, I'll save you the time and trouble. I've gone and I've looked, and it's not exhaustive by any stretch of the imagination, but specifically, strategically gone to find in different eras and different times the most reputable within the school, etc., and say, look, this is how the scholars are dealing with it. This is the discourse. This is what they're saying. You can see there's no need to get bent out of shape. And there's, then you can, then I just be quiet. I just let it at that. Let it marinate. Sometimes it might take, sometimes it might not. But yeah, I think just to keep things kind of let's turn the volume down,
Alhamdulillah. I think, alhamdulillah, we're going to close the discussion here, but hopefully a lot of people who watch this, there's a lot of interest when it comes to these kind of issues. And hopefully people will realize that, yeah, there are differences, but those differences are not as big as some people would like to present them as. And I will always encourage people to study with the teachers of the deen who are looking to unite the ummah, looking to come together, looking to listen to others, looking to understand that Ahl Sunnah has always had a plurality within it, inshallah ta'ala. So I will just ask at the end for all of you, please, to mention if people want to study more with yourselves, how can they do that? What's the platform? If we start with Dr. Shadee, please.
Well, first of all, the one thing you didn't mention here, All three of these panelists are from the great state of New Jersey, which, by the way, if it wasn't for the great state of New Jersey and the 10 days of George Washington in Trenton, we'd all be speaking British English right now and drinking bland tea, and right? We'd all be British still. New Jersey's the state that basically saved the Revolutionary War. People don't know this, but the 10 days of Washington, the 10 days in Trenton, but New Jersey is represented 75% and really 100% of your panelists, since you're the host. But people could come by Jersey now, and you could study all four madhabs, and you could meet imams from all four madhabs in one day, right? By traveling around.
This is a call to migration to Jersey.
Listen, someone could, Dar es Salaam travel could make a four madhabs tour by stopping first at Sheikh Osama Salhiyan ICPC, then going 30 minutes to Sheikh Ahmed Metwally, and then coming to Central Jersey and seeing Dr. Mateen Khan and Sheikh Nasar Shudri and Sheikh Murad. They study from Hanafi fiqh. Then come to MBIC and see myself, Sheikh Haroon, Sheikh Ismail Bowers. Then go down south and see John Starling in Cherry Hill, and you can have a four madhabs tour and get a good grasp of what our tradition looks like. So, and that's what I try to do also on our online platform. Is called arcview.org. And our goal is we don't promote one madhab. We are teaching all four madhabs and 3 madhahib in al-Aqida. Yeah, 2 of them are live. The Ashari Maturidi is live. Hanbali Aqida has a pre-recorded class, and we're going to add live. We're going to add a live non-stop Hanbali teaching of Aqida. And so that's, I think, that is the way of the ulama should be, to promote these. Like the Imam said, this is what the evidence is. I don't have anything to gain. I'm not trying to get anything out of this. I'm not trying to get fulus out of this. I'm not trying to get people to like me out of this. I'm not trying to get my kicks out of this. Everyone should have a hobby and get the sa'ada of their nafs, get it somewhere else, not in the deen. In the deen, put it out there, bring it to the people, let them be with Allah Ta'ala with the knowledge that they see is suitable. And we've done our job if you just put the adillah out there and put the sources out there. And that's, I think, what matters. And may Allah accept it from us. Ameen. And may Allah let us live from this day until the day we enter our grave without fitan in our deen.
Ameen. Ameen. Dr. Ahmed?
What was the question, Sheikh?
People
I got distracted by the New Jersey tour.
Have you done the tour?
He's the tour guide. What do you mean? He's the tour guide.
Yeah, well, I'm going to pitch it to Haji Mustafa. By the way, Dar es Salaam, the biggest agency in the Western Hemisphere, is also in New Jersey. Haji Mustafa is Egyptian from New Jersey. So I'm going to pitch it to Dar es Salaam and do a 4 madhab tour.
Bismillah. Now, Fadal, Doctor.
So what was the question? Seriously, Sheikh, what was the question?
If you study with yourself, how would that occur? Do you have an online platform?
So I don't. So I'm not very tech savvy, unfortunately. I don't have the mashallah, the backing and ideas. I'm usually most of the time at the masjid. So all my teachings are done at the masjid. So that will either be like at Falah Center. We do have dedicated programs for streamlining people who want more students of knowledge, or to seek a bit more knowledge. That's underneath a banner of what's called Rawaq al-Falah. And speaking of being open to other aspects. And one of the reasons I called it Rawaq al-Falah, because it reminded me of Rawaq al-Azhar, right? where you'd have all the different madahib or all different schools of Aqida. They'll be in the same area, but in different corners, right? And so I really like that name, Rawaq al-Falah. So this is more of our side of more advanced Islamic education. And so essentially it's more on site. At Masjid al-Falah. Wallah.
And Sheikh John?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to share. We're actually launching a course today. Registration opens up for Ibn Qudama's Lum'ah in Hanbali Aqida. And there's also a beginner level fiqh course in Hanbali fiqh. And this is on hanbalidisciples.com. A little more concentrated than, a little more humble of an effort, but Daru Ashab al-Hanabila. HanbaliDisciples.com. That's where we're launching. We've been teaching classes online for a while, but we've created a kind of an institute of sorts where everything's being a little bit more organized and offered in a systematic way for people. And yeah, we made sure, just for you, actually, we made sure that the courses were open today for registration.
MashaAllah.
They're going to start in about a month or so, but just for this program, just so we could, yeah, have it available for you guys. Jazakallah khair.
MashaAllah. I like the
also. As for Islam Answers, we have the online academy. We have over 30 on-demand courses and 4 live courses currently running. So people, if they are interested, they can look at that and look into that, inshallah. Thank you to you all. Allah Most High bless you. Jazakumullahu khairan. Thank you to the audience. And may Allah Most High make this a means of guidance. And I think one of the things that was mentioned in the discussion is that, look, when scholars interacted more, you know, they understood each other more, inshallah ta'ala, and this is what we're calling for, and this is what the unity panel is all about. People are from different backgrounds, speak to each other, understand each other. Very often the differences we have are just about semantics or terminology, and that's how it's going to be alleviated. And, you know, really stay away from messages that are messages of division, essentially saying study with me and my group and don't speak to anybody else. This is a huge problem we have, unfortunately, in sectarian circles in the UK. Study with us, speak to us, don't speak to anybody else. This is a disaster. Barakallahu feekum walhamdulillahi.
Jazakumullah khair.